Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is our very first kickoff of our bryt Family Engagement 2024-2025 Learning Series. And we're so excited that you're watching us tonight and watching this presentation. So I'm going to share my screen and we are going to get going. So my name is Megan Harding, and I'm so lucky to be a part of this team of people that you see on the screen right now. We're the bryt Family Engagement team, and you're going to hear from my teammates in one moment. This is, as I said, our first kickoff presentation on this lecture series, this learning series that we do once a month. And we thought it would be really important to kick off the series with this topic, which is when it's hard to go to school. And so I hope throughout this year that many parents have a chance to watch this video and know that you are not alone. If this is something you are struggling with as a parent, you are absolutely not alone. So we're going to introduce ourselves to you in a moment. And so you'll get to know each of us. You'll hear a little bit more about this later on, but we host this learning session once a month, and then we host a series of parent conversations. So they're just opportunities for you to come together and be in conversation with other parents about some of these topics that you'll hear more about. So you'll get to meet the team who's going to be hosting those. Then we're just going to dive into all of it and do a little bit of learning on this experience of when it's hard for our child to go to school, or our kids to go to school. We're going to learn a little bit about that. And then we'll wrap up with talking about what's coming with our series. So again, my name's Megan Harding. I live in Massachusetts, and I'm the parent of a now 20-year-old, which seems like before the Zoom started, we were talking about memories of like preschool, first days of preschool, which really does feel like yesterday. But now my daughter's 20, college student, definitely experiences the ups and downs of that. So I will pass it over to my friend Victor.
Hi, my name is Victor. Thanks, Megan, for getting us started. I'm Victor Bradley. I've been with the bryt team for, I can't believe, 3 years. Is it 3 years? Wow, time flies. And it's been really a wonderful experience. I've learned so much from parents, from this team, from Megan. I even got to go to a symposium last year, which was really great, where I got to meet all of bryt and really hang out. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and she is going into 8th grade tomorrow for the first time. And she's retreating at the same school, which is great. We have her in new school last year. I was an early child educator for about 31 years, and then I decided to do more trainings for teachers, particularly in the way of DEI work and change maker work and anti-bias, anti-racist work, mostly with school programs, but I also do businesses and churches and synagogues and whoever needs me to do that work. But my specialty is early childhood. I love working with teachers and parents. I also do some work with UMass Boston as well, doing some coaching there with their education department. So my whole world is sort of with children and with parents and with teachers. And so it's so great to be a part of the bryt team. So I get to work with parents. I really enjoy that work. I'm going to pass it to Lakeisha.
Thank you, Victor. Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. I'm Lakeisha Edwards Wilson. I'm also one of the bryt family coordinators here. I've been with bryt, I think it's about 2 years, because Victor, you've been here for 3, so it's about 2 years. I am actually in the state of Georgia, so I'm far away, but I enjoy this work with this group who is, across the country as well. So I am a mother of a 7-year-old boy who just entered the 2nd grade. He is on the autism spectrum, and he also, was reevaluated and has additional diagnosis as well. So we're working with the schools with that. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges or, fears that I had with entering this year with the new diagnosis and how that's going to work or impact him in school. Other than that, I mean, I totally, like Victor, totally enjoy my team. I totally enjoy this work. I'm actually a licensed social worker in the state of Massachusetts and the state of Georgia. I currently work in a children's hospital. So I don't do a lot of education in the schools, but I do some education and social work in the hospitals with parents and parents with children with significant medical issues or mental health issues, etc. So that is me, and I'm going to pass it on to my counterpart, Julie.
Thanks, Lakeisha. Yes, my name is Julie, and I am the parent of 4 kids. I've got a 27-year-old, a 24-year-old, and 19-year-old twins. And I have a whole spectrum of parenting experience. And when you guys are mentioning what you've been through, I think about parenting's just really hard, period. That's all I'm going to say. There's always struggles, and I'm really grateful to have been on this journey with a lot of loving people to have supported me. So I am the furthest away. I live in Oregon, and I have really enjoyed being on this team. I think one of the things that's really great about it is that I learn as much as I give, probably learn more than I give, maybe, if I'm being honest. And I learn from the parents, I learn from my peers here. bryt has such great trainings through family engagement, but also other branches of this program. So it's pretty amazing. I am a teacher or an educator. I've been in schools. This is my 32nd year teaching, and done a variety of things, but currently am a special education teacher. Previously was a bryt coordinator in a middle school. So much of my career has been in middle school, but I've also done high school, which is where I'm at now. So and I'll be running groups each month. On the second Tuesday, I'll be doing elementary parent conversations and then the third Tuesday, which will be middle and high school parent conversations. So I'll be hopefully connecting with some of you to just talk about parenting and provide support with each other. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. So this is the fabulous team. This is the dream team. And as you heard, each of us we're spread out across the country, but we're all parents. We're all deeply interested in the lives of parents and the journeys of parents. So each month when we have these themed conversations, we will kick off with learning together, and then we'll just host really low-key informal conversations where people can bring their experiences together. And we'll talk more about the schedule for those as we go. But tonight's conversation is about when it's hard for our kids to go to school. These learning sessions, they're the first Tuesday of every month. And normally, this is an unusual one, our first one, September. Normally, you will get the link, and it'll be a YouTube live link. And so you'll be watching the presentation separately. Your face won't be on camera. You won't be on screen. You'll be watching us. We'll be there, and we will be welcoming the guest speaker. So I'm going to be doing it today, but typically it's a therapist or someone else that's sort of knowledgeable on a topic area that comes in, and you can ask your questions of this. It's usually someone that has expertise in this area, and you can ask your individual specific questions, but you won't be on camera. So that's something we wanted to share. And I also wanted to just really thank the bryt national team, which is we are the bryt family engagement team as part of the national team. We have a larger and broader national team who's done some good thinking over the years, working with schools, supporting schools on the school side of when it's hard for kids to get to school. So a bunch of the content in here has been cultivated by some of our colleagues on the national team. And then specifically, in addition, we had this great friend last year who came and did a talk for us named Jane Dembski, from the School Avoidance Alliance. And a lot of the content that we learned came from Jane Dembski, her story, her resources. I'm going to share some at the end of this presentation because it's a really great resource for all of you to know about. So here we go. So we are going to hopefully talk about, we're going to learn a little bit about why it's hard for some kids to go to school. And hopefully during this time, we'll learn some things that can be helpful as we support our kids when or if they do struggle with getting to school. And then, as I said, we're going to hear more about these awesome bryt opportunities to learn together, to connect with other parents, and have conversations together. But we are going to talk in a second about language, but really when we think about our kids' experience, whether they're preschool, kindergarten, high school, the whole spectrum, um, when it's difficult to get to school, it often and primarily has to do with trying to cope with anxiety. And so this quote we thought was really helpful. Avoidance is the lifeblood of anxiety. So school refusal is the ultimate example of avoidant coping. And why I wanted to start with that is, I'm going to go back there. Why I want to start with that is if we believe, which I do, that all of us, kids, adults, all of us are doing the best we can at any given moment, then if our child is unable to get to school, it may that is in that moment, whether it's helpful for them, adaptive for them in that moment, it may be the thing that is kind of managing and attempting to cope with anxiety that they're feeling. So I think if we as parents can think of it that way, even though it is so difficult, it's so scary for parents when our kids are continuing to not go to school, if we can think of it from the lens as this is their best attempt to cope, it could potentially shift some things for us. So a lot of times when we think of anxiety, and we're going to have another month that's really all about anxiety, but this has a lot, when it's difficult to go to school, this has a lot to do with anxiety. So a lot of times kids that have a difficult time going to school are really struggling with this like cycle of automatic negative self-talk and self-beliefs, right? That can be really paralyzing for kids and can keep kids from school. I want to mention different language that you might hear around this. So we are talking about using the language when it's hard to go to school. But this concept, this idea we're talking about can be referred to as school phobia, school refusal, school avoidance, chronic absenteeism. These are different terms and concepts that really describe the same experience. And it's really describes an experience when a child is unable to attend school, typically for an extended period, or has difficulties remaining in school for the entire day. So sometimes I think the language of when it's hard to go to school puts that it's sort of the descriptor that maybe is most close to the kid's experience of it. I think sometimes school refusal is descriptive, right? But it may, I often think for kids that struggle with this, if they had a magic wand and, they would erase this in a second if they could. So I think language can be important sometimes, that when we're thinking about these things. And again, that underlying that we believe that students do well when they can, right? And that if we all are doing the very best we can at that moment, doesn't mean next week, next month, or tomorrow, we may have more capacity. But if we are doing the very best we can, that may look different from the kid next door who is struggling with or not struggling with different things. But we believe that if students have what they need, so some of the reasons that it can be hard to go to school, there's a long list here, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of the function of not going to school, what that can provide for kids. But there's a real spectrum here when you look about some of the reasons it can be hard for kids to go to school. Anxiety and kind of mood fluctuations are a big reason, but lots of things, right? Bullying or academic challenges, or maybe there was an incident at school, and so your child's having an acute stress response to it, or just feeling they don't fit in at school, feeling unwelcome, difficulty managing transition. So we're going to talk about a little bit more of these, but just kind of the point that there's many reasons, and no one case is the exact same as any other. But what we learned last year from the School Avoidance Alliance is that the research talks about 4 different functions of staying away from school, and that each of these really are 4 different explanations that talks about what propels the avoidance, what propels it. And so there's 2 that are about kind of staying away from school, and the other 2 are more about the pull toward home. So I'm going to go through each of these to see how we make sense of them. So the first one talks about that the function of, school avoidance, or when it's hard for kids to go to school, is quite literally to just stay away from objects or situations at school that make that child feel distressed, unpleasant physical symptoms, or general distress. And we know when students experience anxiety, that can be a really acute physical experience for kids. So an emotional, physical experience of trying to stay away from situations that make them feel unsafe. And if you just think about that, if I think about, wow, if there's a situation that I experience that I believe is unsafe for me, then there's kind of some logic that I stay away from that thing. So I think when we think about communication with our kids too, and how to validate we can validate our kids' experience without endorsing, necessarily every perspective or opinion, but we can validate that it makes sense that they would want to stay away from something that felt unsafe. So how can we help them right size it and sort of address some of what's underlying it? So in this example, kids can be afraid of lots of different things. It could be, feeling fearful if they feel academically it's just too hard or too challenging, and they're afraid of not keeping up academically. Maybe there's a dynamic on the playground that's really scary that they're afraid of. Maybe in the lunchroom, they never have anyone to sit with, and it just brings up just horrible feelings in the lunchroom. Maybe there's a person that they don't feel comfortable with, whether that's another child or a teacher they don't feel safe with, or that they just feel like they can't relate or don't fit in to this. That these are all examples of things that can propel that difficulty going to school when it's about kind of staying away from those situations. Another type of function that's about sort of staying away from is about avoiding either social or evaluative situations that are painful to the child. And the research talks about this as being more specifically about school performance situations. So test anxiety, or the real fear of being asked to read aloud in class or speaking in front of others. Sometimes it's athletic, gym related, gym activity, or, these sorts of things. So again, these are descriptors of what could be going on, and it's helpful to get a sense of these kind of 4 different functions so that we can best get a sense of how to address it. So the next 2 are not so much about avoiding what's at school, but are sort of turning toward what's at home. Excuse me. So this one function would be about obtaining something at home that is just feels better, is more comfortable or more enjoyable than going to school. So for kids who may feel live with high levels of anxiety or generalized anxiety, and being in their bedroom with all their stuff just feels safer. It's like that cocoon. It feels it just feels safer. It could be, that for a student who's feeling really on the outer level of their challenge, kind of challenge line, and school feels really hard, and that can trigger anxiety or worry, staying home to play games or, watch movies or things like that that are a little bit more escapist. Or sometimes if there's a neighbor or a friend or someone who is not at school wanting to. So these are more, again, in that experience of a child living with anxiety, these things that provide more comfort. Um, and then the last one is, and this is to receive attention from a parent or a significant other. So this has two sides of it. One side is just having really deep difficulties separating from a parent or caregiver. Could be a sibling. So this could be the more classic, as we know, sort of like the separation anxiety, but it can also be sometimes circumstantial if a parent is dealing with a chronic health issue, or if there's a parent who is newly sober or something like that, where the child has a hard time separating, either because they're worried about their parent, or or they feel like they have some sort of job to do related to that. And the other thing can, feeling needed by a parent. So this could be, if the child is worried, will my parent be okay if I'm not there, that kind of thing. So as you can see, these are really 4 different functions, and helpful to think about, because not only might our reactions as parents differ, if we came to understand which of those 4 types of functions might the avoiding school be serving, that may change the kinds of conversations we have with our kids, the kinds of support we try to get for our kids, the kind of next steps we might take. So that's something that's just helpful. And when we think about it, it's helpful both to think about each of those 4, but also just even how we think about those 2. So is my kid who's really struggling to go to school, is my kid truly experiencing like an aversion to school? They really don't want to go to the school? Or is the bigger thing that my child is drawn more to a pull at home? So that can be really helpful discerning question to figure out, and to have conversations with your child about. Um, one of the things that we know about when it's hard to go to school, these can be sort of more acute situations, or it can be chronic for kids. But we do know, which is why we talk a lot, and the bryt intervention. Any of you who are parents of a kid in a bryt intervention right now, our whole bryt, which is a school-based intervention, is really for kids who have had prolonged and extended absences from school. A lot of what underlies that is knowing, again, yeah, the longer a student is away from school, the harder it is to return and get back in. And so that early intervention on the school side, and on the kind of family side, the better to intervene earlier. But the acute experience of this can sometimes be all of a sudden. Like, this is something maybe your child hasn't experienced before, and all of a sudden they're really, really not going to school, or they're really calling to get picked up, all the time. And sometimes it can be mysterious for parents. Why is this happening? What precipitated this? Where did this come from? Sometimes it can linger after a period where not going to school made sense. And this I can relate to. I remember what my child in high school had wisdom teeth out, and then got like a little bit sick after getting the wisdom teeth out. And then we had more absences from school, and it was like harder to, it got harder and harder to do the return. even though those, first, bunch of days of not being in school were because, for the reasons of the wisdom teeth. Chronic, this can last, yeah, sometimes longer than a year or more. So if you're watching this and you are feeling so overwhelmed because your child has not been able to consistently go to school for a year or more, I really, really want you to hear that you're not alone, and that a lot of times parents feel a lot of shame about this, but you're absolutely not alone. There are others out there. And at the end of this, I'm going to talk about a network that we learned about with the School Avoidance Alliance, that has a network and a group for parents. So yeah, you are not alone. So 28% of young people display some of these behaviors at some point during their lives. So that's more than 1 in 4, right? So a lot of us have experienced some of this. This incredible number, right? If you look at the bottom of that mind-blowing number of young people in our country who are currently school avoidant, or having a hard time getting to school. And then this number in here is just important, whether your, child is experiencing actual difficulty getting to school or not. 18% of kids who have anxiety disorders and live with anxiety disorders receive treatment for those. So a lot of our topics over this year that we're going to talk about actually have anxiety sort of in the middle of them in different ways, whether it's experiencing bullying or, there's different topics that really some way or another relate to anxiety. And so I think this number is really powerful because clearly anxiety has a lot to do with school avoidance when it's hard to go to school. But that so many of our kids and young people are managing anxiety and not getting treatment. And I would imagine that number is very similar for adults. So it's just something to be aware of. Transitions at so this experience of when it's hard to go to school avoidance can occur at all ages, as I said, but the research says it's most common in ages 5 and 6 and 10 and 11, and during transitional periods. So going from, maybe elementary school to middle, or middle to high school, or maybe pre-K into K, that these are just helpful to know that these are, and it makes sense, right? Because these are periods with less familiarity for students, less routine relationships. So want to say there is help, and I'm going to talk more specifically for when you're interested, if your child's struggling with this and you're looking for kind of therapy out there. There are therapies that are specifically kind of have an evidence-based or base around this, but that's an important thing to know. It's also, which I've been stressing a lot, the anxiety, really important to know that this is not a behavior problem. This is not a willful sort of power move or willful, that this really is an expression of emotional distress or anxiety. So again, hopefully that can help with our lens. Doesn't necessarily make it easier for parents, but if you kind of see it that way, it can be helpful. As I said, intervening early helps because it can progress quickly. And the discerning between the chronic and the acute school avoidance can again help figure out how to speak with the school, how to speak with therapists about this. And that we know that this causes great worry and tension for parents. So not only that worry that a lot of us might sit with is like, oh my God, how long will this go on? But also sometimes this can impact, parents' employment, or if they have to call out for work and things like that. So absolutely, we recognize this experience can cause great worry. So what has been shown to help and what has maybe been shown to make things worse? So as we talked about those 4 functions initially about about the why, the 4 different categories of why with school avoidance, as I said earlier, if you and your child and can get a little bit more clear around the reason that it's happening in those four different lenses, it can help determine what the next steps are. So there is something called a school refusal assessment scale that helps kids and parents figure out what that reason is. And there's a link at the end of this, and I'll show you where to get it online, which it's a free resource online that you can access. There are three different kinds of therapy that the evidence has shown is effective with reducing school avoidance. So CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, that's a type of therapy that has been very useful to address the particular anxiety around going to school and the difficulty going to school. Exposure therapy, which really is a type of therapy that is about kind of accompaniment. So in really bite-sized pieces, really small pieces, a child might experience, just a really gradual attempt at the return to school, which could just be, a parent drives them to the school and they never get out of the car. They just drive right back home, but they got close to the school. And maybe it's, getting out of the car and walking into the building and, staying for 15 minutes and then coming home as like a planned, it's like this really bite-sized incremental efforts. And that each of those bite-sized efforts are being processed with a therapist in exposure therapy. And then this newer treatment that's called space treatment, and comes out of Yale University, and this is specifically an intervention that is shown to reduce students' anxiety that leads to school avoidance, but the actual treatment itself happens largely with parents. And it's just a different intervention that's been shown to be helpful. Including a full team is also helpful, right? So making sure you're in communication with the school counselor, if you have a therapist, it's always helpful to check in with this stuff with the primary care provider too, so they can rule out other things if there might be if there's chronic fatigue or, other things. It's always helpful to bring in the primary care. And then things like that we know. So relationships, predictability, managing expectations. These are all things that help with anxiety in general. But if you think about time, so if your child's starting middle school for the first time, is there anybody that your child can can know, or is there a relationship that can be forged somehow with either a neighbor or anybody? The predictability, so knowing what, for example, if one of the reasons that's really difficult for your child to go to school, if it has to do with sitting in the lunchroom, then being really clear on the kind of what happens before lunch, what are some maybe workarounds during lunch period, what happens afterwards. So it's the routine, the predictability, being clear. So many schools that I know of, there's kids that eat their lunch in classrooms with teachers or with the school counselor. If you have a bryt intervention at your school, that's often a place where it just feels more comfortable to have lunch. And then managing expectations for the parent and for the school, right? So if the team is coming around a student who's really having trouble going to school, it doesn't mean that after kind of talking about it and coming up with a plan, the next day the child's going to be going back to school full time forever. So really managing the expectations that this can be a slow return sometimes, or the return could be, bite-sized, as I said. What the research talks about not working or making it worse is punishment, punitive actions. It almost never works to solve the problem and often exacerbates the issue. This is for students who are experiencing this feels awful already. This is a huge struggle already. Again, if they had a magic wand and could not feel this way and could not be struggling with this, I would certainly say that they all would take this away if they could. So it's not something you could just tell your kid to stop, because if they could, they would. So not addressing it gradually, as I said, like the big push to sort of go from zero to everything. So to think about it incrementally. And then blaming the child or the parent, as kids carry a lot of shame around this, parents carry a lot of shame around this. This is an experience of anxiety, which is nobody's fault. Most is certainly not the parent's fault, certainly not the child's fault. This is an experience that the team and everyone needs to come together with compassion to figure out how to address. This isn't because somebody did something wrong. It's very, very, very stressful. And you see that little battery there on empty, right? Parents, as we know, are doing the very best they can, the very, very best they can. And parents need support around this experience, because this is exhausting and complicated for parents. So again, yeah, calling in the team. So as I mentioned, it's helpful to let your primary care provider know, your child's primary care provider. They can rule out other things, just to make sure that none of this is about sort of a health related issue. Connecting with the school counselor. There's also accommodations. Public schools are required to provide accommodations. So if your student is experiencing anxiety and cannot access their education because they cannot get to school, then they are eligible for a 504 accommodation at least. And a 504 accommodation, those can be relatively flexible. It's an accommodation that the student and the family and the school can set up to make school a little bit easier for them struggling with it. So for example, some schools, if it's a 504 accommodation, can be flexible with their attendance policy. Because some schools have, if you miss 10 days, you're automatically fail and have to repeat the year. Well, if you have a 504 accommodation for this anxiety and school avoidance anxiety, there can sometimes be some flexibility there. There are other accommodations I'm going to keep calling out this fabulous School Avoidance Alliance, which if you Google School Avoidance Alliance, there's such a resource-rich webpage with so much information and resources for parents and for schools around this experience. And one of the resources is a whole booklet on various 504 accommodations that you can ask your child's school if you think some of those could be helpful. And then reintegration interventions. And we are bryt. We're the family arm of the bryt national team. This is what we do. So if you're watching this and you don't have a bryt intervention in your school, reach out to bryt. We come to you, we can give a sort of free introduction of what the bryt intervention is, but it's a room in the school. It's specifically built for a very, very small number of students, to create a soft landing for students who have missed an extended amount of school due to either mental health, sometimes physical health. And it's a way to create a high degree of support in bringing students back in. And these interventions are really successful. Students get back typically to their, are on track to graduate, get back full-time to their classes. So really these reintegration interventions are very useful. So a couple more resources just to share. I mentioned, and I'm going to talk about this, our parent conversations that the four of us offer. This is so challenging for parents, and it can help to just share our stories, speak, talk about the topic from whatever closeness or distance we're comfortable talking about this topic. So I will go over the topics briefly, and you will be getting shortly the links and the dates for all of those, so you can join in any parent conversation that you'd like to. Again, this School Avoidance Alliance, if you Google that, they have a masterclass for parents. So that's actually not a free resource, but they do have other free resources on their website. You do have to pay for that. But there's just, if you are struggling and you have been struggling with this for a really long time, it could be a really great network and learning for you. And then I mentioned that space, that space therapy. There's a list on, if you Google space treatment, that's the one out of Yale that is a newer therapy approach for kids and families that are dealing with this. The others, I mentioned the CBT and the exposure therapy. Not all, but a lot of therapists, just general therapists that work with kids and anxiety, are familiar with those. So those are kind of easier to come by. Okay, so I am going to stop for a sec. I'm going to stop my share before I go into just more specifically about what we want to offer all of you this year. Just want to pause because that was a lot of information, and just invite my colleagues, my teammates here, to share anything that stood out for you when you were thinking about this, or any thought you have that comes to mind, or experience that anyone wants to share.
I just want to share because I work in the hospital, and I see this a lot in some of the clinics, not the ones that I work in, but sometimes if I'm on call to discuss issues with kiddos. And a lot of this, you'll see it with kiddos who have chronic pain, where they avoid going to school because there's so much pain, and they're trying to figure out, pain is something that is hard to measure, because you can't measure it with a stethoscope or anything. It has to be on a scale, and and depending on the person's level of comfort with pain.
Yeah.
So I get called a lot on stuff like this. Well, the kid is not going to school, and you see a lot of blame on both the parent and the kiddo. And I think the providers in these pediatric hospitals, not so much the pediatricians, primary care, but like in the hospitals, because at these specialty clinics, because the first thing they want to do is saying that, oh, this is school neglect, or this is, so they're really quick to be like, okay, we need child protective services in here. Wait, hold on. We need to
Yes.
see what else is going on.
Mhm.
So I see it a lot, and I don't think it's fair, because these kiddos have a lot of stuff going on, so it could be additional things. So
Yeah.
for that said, that the providers in these pediatric hospitals have to get some kind of education around school avoidance and stuff like that. I mean, social work could only do so much,
Yeah.
but when they hear it from other sources, or they're getting trainings, understanding that these are real things, then maybe they'll change their perspective on how to work with these families, because it's always the blame game when we go
Yes.
in there. And then if I kind of try to tell the providers, no, we got to look at, they get really kind of upset, because it's like, no, this is what you need to do. But we need to see what's really going on, especially the kiddos that I see that's in pain,
Yes.
that comes in for pain. They don't,
Yeah.
they don't want to go to school because they're dealing with a lot of pain, and they probably can't function or think if they're in pain. Who can?
Yes.
So
That's so helpful, Lakeisha, because I hadn't thought about that piece, because we think so much about, like, all of the, like, the mental health pieces, right? But
yeah.
right, that piece that yeah, I'm really glad you said that around physical pain, that
But all of that
absolutely.
intertwines as well with the mental health too,
Yeah.
because sometimes you'll see that in addition to that, where there's a lot of layers,
Yeah.
but at the same time, the providers need to take the time to understand what's really going on, and not the first thing you want to do is call child protective services
Yes.
and penalize these parents because the kids aren't going to school.
Right.
So that's where they need big time education, is in these pediatric hospitals and clinics.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Anything else, Julie or Victor?
Well, I was just going to add, you were reminding me just when you were talking, just of students that I've had over the years. One in particular that, came to school, and the first reaction, even by educators, was like, we're going to push this kid. They've had it too easy. you know, because you hear stories from the year before when maybe they were struggling, and just that reminder of change can be glacial. It needs to be slow. And there needs to be there needs to be a relationship there. And that's one of the things that bryt does. As a bryt coordinator, we were given time and space to work with these kids and give them that opportunity to reintegrate in a safe space, in a brave space, really, in a space where they did hard things, but you or I might not have, you know, we might not see it on the outside, but they were coming back and reintegrating in school. So just reminding parents that it takes time. And then just the blame game, I'm going to, you know, echo what Lakeisha said. There is so much blame, you know, as an educator, parents are blamed, you know, doctors blame the parents, or they, you know, or the school. I hear a lot from parents that it's the school's fault that their kid does nothing at school. And it's just like, let's all get on the same team and work together. And so I just want to like that's something that just reminds me this year in my job is, you know, communicating that and reminding people that it takes time to change, and that we're all on the same team. Let's stop blaming each other.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely.
I really like what both of you said. And Megan, it was really great just to hear you talk about this subject, which is so hard, and just kind of have parents just kind of relax around their feelings. And a lot of them have been hurt. And where I've sort of fallen this is being an early child educator. And a lot of kids come to me because it hasn't worked to go to other schools. So they end up leaving the school or actually getting kicked out of the school because parents don't follow the rules of the early child program. And so they either don't come enough or they're not able to leave their child, and they don't. And so I'm starting from a level of distress. And so I usually just slow everything way down and just really build a relationship with the parent so they trust me first. And then a lot of times the child will trust me as well, because the parent has relaxed a little bit because they've been hurt in a particular way by the other school programs. So that's sort of my lens of what I've seen. It's happening right now at schools, like right at this moment where kids and parents are coming in, you know, having a bad experience when they really didn't have to, because they weren't given the time to connect. They weren't given the time to land in a classroom with their child, and then the child feels safe enough to be there. So you really have to pick a program that's gonna help you with that, and find a place that makes sense. And that will help in the beginning, because these kids are 2 and 3 years old, and they're families for the first time sometimes. So it's hard.
Yeah. This is so, I just appreciate this, like all these through threads, right? We're hearing how tender it is, what a tender experience for the kid, how harshly parents, you know, might be getting blamed from the school, from the doctor, from, you know, getting kicked out for not doing it right, you know, just what a crunch and how hard this is. And that had the importance of relationships and all of that. And then, you know, what I truly believe, I know this, our team truly believes, is how important connection is to sustaining ourselves when, as parents, when we're going through all of this. So I'm going to this last piece that I'm going to do is just let you all know about this incredible year we have for you that's designed this year. And then we'll see if anyone has any last thoughts, and then we will sign off. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. So we, as the Family Engagement National Team, offer and we have an entire year of completely free education and support for any parent. So if you're watching this and you don't have a child in the bryt intervention, you are more than welcome. And, you know, tell your friends and tell your neighbors. We really understand how rough and hard the journey can be as a parent, and we want to just create spaces. We want to create spaces. So that's what we're going to do. And that's what we have been doing. So the first Tuesday of the month, we are going to have a learning series we have a learning series, as I mentioned, and these are typically, I'm doing the bulk of it today, but all the rest of the year we'll be inviting others in to share their expertise around the topics that I'll talk through in a second. And then the second week of the month, we are going to have we're going to hold space to have parent conversations about that theme. And so the second week of the month, it will be for parents of elementary age kids. And we have both an East Coast time that we're holding these parent conversations and a West Coast time. The third week of the month, it will be same thing, holding space for parent conversations around that theme for parents of middle and high school students. And then the last week of the month, it will be an affinity space for BIPOC parents, again, on that theme, parent conversations around that theme. We also have a Facebook support group. So those, online Facebook support groups can be active, right? Those kinds of support groups can be active. So if you are someone who, these are just 3 different options, right? So the first one, first Tuesday of the month, you're not going to be on the screen, but you can listen, you can drop your questions for that particular person who might have expertise around something you and your family are navigating. Then there's a series of weekly parent conversations that are just a really great time to connect with other parents who are going through some of this stuff. And then also the Facebook support group that you can hop on anytime. So that is, as I mentioned, I've walked through this already. These week 2, week 3, and week 4 have both an East Coast friendly and a West Coast friendly time. So that's that. And these are our topics. So today, this is again supporting your child who struggles to go to school. Next month, we're going to have the theme of the month is really parenting a child who's getting bullied. We know this is prevalent, and these topics have been identified by parents who responded when we asked what topics do you want to connect and have conversations with other parents about? What conversations do you want to learn about? And these were the ones that parents mentioned. So we know this stuff is prevalent. So October is parenting a child who's getting bullied. November, we're going to hear from young people themselves. And we did this last year, which was great. And so young people are going to be thinking about what advice young people have for parents about how we as parents can best support our kids' mental health journeys. So we're going to hear that directly from a few different young people. December is really about the theme of how to strengthen relationships with your middle or high school student. January is how do we build, nurture, support our kids in developing skills where they can advocate for themselves. They can develop that self-advocacy that we know is critical in being able to seek help later on, to seek resources, to seek February is going to be an affinity month and it's really about navigating white systems as a BIPOC parent. So those conversations will be for BIPOC parents and that learning session. And that'll be just kind of facing for BIPOC parents, interfacing with sort of more of the structural and institutional racism that happens when BIPOC parents are dealing with maybe the insurance company or the hospital or schools or whatever the various systems are. March, we're really going to, which is a really broad topic, but really learning about and then talking about how do we best parent an anxious child. So when our kids are living with anxiety, how do we best parent and support and navigate that? April is parenting my sweet friendless child. So those parents who have kids who might struggle to make friends or have friends, what are some things that parents can think about? And then the last one in May is when you're not comfortable with your child's peer group. So this could be younger, high school, but you're not quite comfortable with your child's peer group. So these are our themed months. And that's it. So again, I'm going to stop the share. It's an exciting year. I have a ton to learn. Looking at all that, I have a lot to learn. And really, really hoping that those of you that are watching will log on. So before we sign off, I just want to open it up to teammates, anything else on your mind, anything else you want to say to the parents out there for the year? Anything on your mind?
Uh,
Oh, you want to
sorry,
go?
Victor.
You want to go? We're
No,
anxious.
I just wanted to basically say, you know, we all do a great job, but especially Victor, I gotta put you out there because only because I think you do your job's very important, but also because you're a male and because the work that we do is like mainly female dominated. I think with a male perspective coming in and talking to families and especially little kids, because little kids will see, oh my goodness, this is a male. Um, they, their perspective is a little bit different than coming from a female, because a lot of it, their teachers are females, their preschool teachers are females. So when they see a male, and when parents see a male coming in and discussing, all the concerns or issues or the groups that you run outside of Bright, I think it's very important work that they see a male other than a female in this female dominated career path here. So I just want to commend you on the work that you do.
Thank you, Lakeisha. That's beautiful. What I was going to ask you, Megan, is do you think that school avoidance has gotten worse in years, even before COVID? Like, or do you feel like it's always been there, but now we're actually really reaching out and helping these kids instead of just being gotta go to school, right? And they end up skipping school, or that's why there was all this truancy when I was growing up, and there was truancy police, and I think it's always been there, but I think now we're kind of solving it. Or do you think things have gotten worse with social media and kids really have more things to escape to? And maybe there's no answer to this, but I just
Yeah.
ask you
No,
that.
thanks, Victor. I think, well, I appreciate you bringing up the truancy thing too, because I think a lot of this also has to do with our own ongoing education with language. So even moving from school refusal to school avoidance to, when it's hard to go to school, it's like we're sort of changing our language in a way that, oh, this isn't truancy. Because like I remember growing up too and seeing all the like posters about truancy and all the advertisements about truancy. I do think we have much more awareness now of the motor of anxiety and how it shows up in these ways. But it is a really interesting question. And I don't know actually if it's gotten worse or we're just kind of have that new language for it. I do think we were talking about it before we started recording around COVID, right? The impact with COVID. So there's some kids who actually it might have been more of a little bit of a nervous system fit to be home during the lockdown. And then when school opened up again, so much harder to go back because they were in the cocoon that for their nervous systems maybe worked well for them. We certainly know, and we were talking about this before we hit record, there are lots of kids where that was the complete opposite, who were just, as we know, so I don't know. That is a really good question. Like, is it just that our language and our lens has changed, and so now we label it differently and see it differently, or, has it gotten worse? That's a good question.
I've noticed in the hospital a lot since COVID, I blame everything on COVID, that the parents have increasingly become a lot more anxious and stressed out because of all the, I guess, the new changes that have been happening and, being locked down for so long. That has definitely increased a lot. And you can definitely see it in their behaviors, like, bringing kids to appointments. There's a lot of stressors. And I think there's an increase of stressors as well since COVID has hit. And that's due to lack of resources as well, because when COVID hit, a lot of the resources were terminated or eliminated. So now we're just stuck with whatever is left. So I've noticed that as well with the parents, with all of that elevating.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add, I mean, you nailed it. It takes a village, right? Like,
Yeah.
the kids weren't just isolated, we were too. And parenting is a really hard gig, and we need I need my peers to be able to walk through it, each stage of raising a child. So And then there's the Surgeon General's latest warning, how
Yes, right.
parenting is you know, causing parents to have poor mental health in a nutshell. So it's a stressful job.
Yes. Well, I can't imagine a more sort of fitting boost to what we want to offer all of you out there. We want to be in it together. We want to be connected to you in it and have these conversations and learn together. Yeah, I was really struck to when someone, I can't remember now if one of you had forwarded it to me or if it was Paul or where I got it, but yeah, that was a striking piece. So let's not, do it alone, right? Let's do it together. We will be really sending out all of our kind of links and information. And, you can also reach out to us if you're a parent in a Bright intervention in a school with any questions. And we're just so grateful that you're out there, and we wish you the very, very best. And as Julie said, it is hard, and we know it. We know it's hard, and we want to be there with you. So thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much.